welcome back to 2020. And the topic today is, what can Australian politics learn from the Trump win? There's an old saying, when America sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. But is this saying still true today? And if so, how much can Australia be impacted by the Trump election win? And if we are, will that include our politics and, more importantly, our political class? Are our politicians now going to stand up for issues that are important to them and not be afraid of a perceived popular opinion? And the political class on both sides of the spectrum, can they learn anything from Trump's against all the odds win? His second bite of the cherry as the 47th president of the United States of America. Well, I'm joined in the studios today by a very special guest. He's been watching the US election campaign and its eventual outcome with eagle eyes, and he's exploring today what we can all learn from it. Damian Wyld leads the Australian Family Coalition, and they are all about defending the family, promoting a society grounded on conservative Christian values, and aspiring to be a safeguard of our basic freedoms. And I also want to give a special mention that Damian, just under a year ago, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. At one point there, he was given his last rites. All hope was gone. He had a brain tumor, and somehow God has healed him. He's in the studio today. He walked in. He told me last night he did leg presses of about 140 kilos, which in his hotel, I don't know why he's got so much luggage, but anyway, he's fighting fit. He joins us in the studio now. Damian, welcome.
G'day, Andrew. It's great to be here.
It is, Damian, and as I said, it's amazing that you have just walked into the studio. Tell us what's happened, mate. How does someone who's been given the last rites end up walking around like you are today?
Well, I was on the show just a few weeks ago and asked that same question, and I was asked, was it miraculous? I'd like to say that it was, but I know that, God works through human instruments as well, and no matter how it turned out, whether it was something absolutely divinely inspired or whether it was just the host of people who worked tirelessly to get me back on my feet, I know that he was responsible, and I give thanks to him.
Yeah, so obviously you allowed medical professionals to treat the cancer, as well as prayed and believed God. But you said just 6 months ago your kids were tying up your shoelaces for you because you didn't have the strength to do it.
Not just that, strength was one part, certainly. I was fatigued. I had huge issues, which I still have, with some of my nerve endings. So, when you can't feel what you're doing, you can't do up your shirt buttons, you can't tie your own shoelaces. And you could just quite easily say, well, that's embarrassing. But I guess for me, it was an exercise in humility, realising that, there are plenty of other people out there who need help. And suddenly I found myself in that situation as well. It was quite an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, how old are your kids?
Well, I've got 7.
Mate, you're a prolific breeder, my friend. 7 kids.
Life is short. My wife says we'll stop when we get an ugly one. My eldest is nearly 15 and my youngest is nearly 4.
Okay, so this is a family, and family has faced a real crisis there. So I want to encourage our listeners to pray for Damian and his wife and his 7 kids. What they've been through, many of us will not even be able to understand. Some of us will as well. But let's pray for this guy. After the interview today, I just maybe encourage you just to say a few prayers for him. Just believe God for continued health, continued strength. And I don't know, are there more kids on the drawing boards, or have we given up?
We'll see.
Well, there you go. He's up for another one. Let's get him to 10. And then once you get to 10, of course, you've got to go to 11, because then you can play cricket as a family. You can be the coach. So, but yeah, let's pray for Damian and his family. But Damian, we're here today to talk about this US election campaign and the eventual outcome, which, of course, is the against all the odds Trump win. What were your thoughts about the US election campaign as it unfolded in the past 12 months?
Well, I mean, a bit like Trump's first victory, I can honestly say I did expect it. Not because I've got some crystal ball, but because I think we can just see the trends in America like we can in Australia, and we can often see where things are likely headed. I think it was fascinating to see how it did pan out this time in America, particularly because we had the usual sorts of trends against Trump and against the Republican victory, namely the mainstream media, the public sort of commentary that's going on, but also even things like the amount of expenditure. The Democrats just left him in their wake in terms of what they were able to throw at it monetarily. So
what was it, about $1 billion that Kamala Harris spent?
It was.
She's still in debt. So
absolutely.
So she spent more than $1 billion.
So note to Polly's here, don't do that. But, to see him win despite that, I think that is very telling as well, and very instructive, and we'll probably, I guess, tease out some of those reasons why.
Well, let's go there now because, like you said, you've mentioned that as in the first election when the mainstream media were just dead against him, the pollsters were against him. I mean, do you remember just a couple of days before the election, the most respected pollster in America, and you just wonder if there was a brown paper bag passed under a table somewhere, gave this definitive outcome. There's no way Trump can win. There's a pathway for Harris. And even here at Vision, people were telling me about it. And I just said, no, it's propaganda. I'm sorry, I'm not accepting it. But they said, no, but this is a respected pollster. So, what can we learn from I suppose, the diminishing influence of the mainstream mainstream media in America?
Well, I do want to say, well, basically don't believe them, but that might be a bit simplistic. But, the media, the chattering classes, these self-appointed experts, how many times have they got it wrong now? They were wrong about Trump both times. They were wrong about the Brexit result in Britain. They were wrong here in Australia last year about The Voice. We were all told it was a done deal, and then look at the result. It was an astonishing no. So I think we need to take what they're saying with a pinch of salt is ultimately what I would say.
Yeah, 100%. And even there's some great commentators in America. I was just mentioning, and some of them aren't Christians, but Dave Rubin's one of my favorites because he's balanced. He's a former Democrat, committed Democrat. Now he's a pro-Trump man, and he's basically saying that this recent Trump election win, it's a political or a social revolution that normal people are rising up against, sort of like the French Revolution, but without the violence, and basically saying to the privileged elite who've been ruling them now for about 30 years, hey, we've had enough. We want things to change.
I think that's right. I mean, you mentioned Dave Rubin as one example. You could point to other people like Tulsi Gabbard as well. Herself, not that long ago, a candidate for the Democratic nominee for president. And she's now seeking to be part of the Trump administration. So absolutely, you're right. There is a groundswell. There is something seismic going on.
Yeah, but there is a groundswell, 100%. But what is behind this groundswell? What are these people demanding? What are they looking for?
Well, people talk about, certainly in Australia, and I think most of the Western world, people talk about a pendulum swinging back, and they keep saying, well, eventually the pendulum will swing back. Sadly, no, it doesn't. From my personal observation, and I'm sure for many of your listeners, things just seem to keep shifting permanently to the left. The world keeps getting stranger and stranger. Our media gets more and more extreme and untrustworthy. So I do wonder, has it sort of come to the breaking point in America now? I mean, America is still a deeply polarised country. Despite that huge red map, my wife and I were talking about this yesterday. She said, but America looks red. And I said, yes, but if you actually go down to each state, Trump only won 50-something to 40-something. What that shows me is, on the surface, it looks like he had this amazing win, and he did. I'm not trying to discredit that. But at the end of the day, there is this deeply polarised country. But I do think that, to answer your question, there are sufficient numbers of people who are just having enough. Just like we saw here with the Voice referendum last year, enough people said, look, I care about our Indigenous brothers and sisters, but I've had enough. This is not the solution. And I think in America, they are looking for a solution.
Yeah, and when you say they've had enough, what have they had enough of?
Oh, well, this might stray outside some of the scope of what AFC deals with. But I know for Americans, as with many Australians, things like immigration are huge issues. But I think coming back more into the core of what we focus on, there are everything from life issues to gender issues to education issues. People have just had enough of the woke. And I do think that there is, probably straying into another chapter of our conversation here, but I think there's a very real likelihood at some point that Australians too will say, I've had enough, as they periodically tend to do. They had an opportunity to do that with last year's referendum, and I think people will be looking at these sorts of issues when we come to the next federal election here as well.
Do you think it is, Damian, that what they've had enough of is things being forced down their throats as opposed to a popular opinion or a popular desire or want that is then being pushed towards our political class who then respond to that? Do you think that's what people have had enough of, being told rather than being asked?
Absolutely. I mean, we used to denigrate the term, I think many people did, certainly, the term populist. But these days it's almost being redeemed, because to be populist basically means to go to the hearts of what real people, the average punter on the street, believes, and not what the chattering classes are telling them. Look at the issue of transgender in sports, for example. The average punter out there, you go and ask them on the street, should a bloke be in a women's sporting competition? And I can tell you right now what the answer will be.
No way.
Of course. But that's not what the media are telling us. That's not what our political elite are telling us. And I think people are just saying, I've had enough, and I'm going to vote for someone who thinks and acts and will do like me.
That's a really good point because, I'm a parent too. I've got two daughters. I'm sure. How many daughters you got? About four?
One.
Only one.
Poor thing.
Six
Poor
boys
thing.
and one girl. You've definitely got to have some more kids, mate. You've got to balance those numbers out.
I pity the future boyfriend. I really do.
But, as a dad of two daughters, and my daughters were very sporty. One was a state gymnast, came second in Queensland when she was about 10, and the other one was a good runner and good at lots of sports. And I'll tell you what, I would not want them stepping into a boxing ring with a man, a biological man who has decided to become a woman or play volleyball. There's that horrible story in America, that volleyball game where that transgender athlete who was a man, saying he was a woman, smashed the ball on a spike and hit this poor girl in the face. And I think she's got a permanent disability or something.
Well, there have been MMA contests. I mean, whatever you make of that in the first place. But, we've seen biological males fracture the skulls of female participants. This is... And we're told this is okay. Come on.
And again, the average person, the average parent out there who are paying their taxes, doing their best, abiding by the laws of society, that's one example. It's something that's been forced on us, isn't it? It hasn't been something that we've demanded from our politicians.
No, absolutely not. And we see this time and time again. I mean, I could stray into another topic. I know abortion's been a big issue here in Queensland in the last 24 hours, but, we're told that somehow it's the conservative side of politics and the public at large that are foisting these culture wars on people. No, they're not. They're just responding because they've had enough. They're sick of being told that, a man in a dress is a woman. They're sick of being told that we need more and more liberal abortion laws. The major changes on abortion in Australia in the last 10 years have not been from the conservative side of politics. They're from people seeking to water them down, make them ever more liberal, ever more available. And I think people are finally, certainly in America, saying enough.
Yeah, okay, so let's ask this question, Damian. So there has been a resounding win by Trump, who had, I guess, the courage to stand up and say, you know what, this stuff's just getting weird. Do you think the other side of politics in America, the Democrat side, will now make an adjustment, or do you think they'll keep going down this path of demanding these radical cultural changes in America?
I think it's going to be very hard for them because I think there'll be the pragmatists who want to, tone things down or at least appear to tone things down. And then there'll be the diehard true believers that say, no, absolutely not. The real question from them is who will succeed. And in a country of over 300 million people and so many states and so many different party branches and institutions, it's impossible to predict where they will go. I mean, even to see where the Republicans have gone, it's a mixed bag. I'd love to say they're all pro-life, but they're not. They're a mixed bag. But we can see that there's, I think, generally a shift in the right direction. The question for the Democrats is, can they really read the mood of the electorate and can they actually respond to that, or are they beholden to their own worldviews?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I do ask that because in many ways, our political parties in Australia, they definitely mimic the American model, the whole presidential election campaign, the massive funding you mentioned before. They certainly watch very closely the British political system. So it's going to be interesting to see how Australia responds. There's both sides of politics. But, thank you so much for joining us on 2020. And you've got about a minute, Dame. You got any final thoughts or final words for our listeners today?
Well, if we can draw anything from Trump's win, it's this, I think. Be authentic, be fearless, don't be afraid of the latest poll or the latest focus group. People have deep and genuine, sincere needs. I think any politician who speaks to those will be rewarded and they'll be entrusted with the office that they're after.
Well said. Well, if you just joined us, Damian Wyld, he leads the Australian Family Coalition. They are all about defending the family, promoting a society grounded on conservative Christian values and aspiring to safeguard our basic freedoms. Google him if you want to know more, the Australian Family Coalition. He's also the Vice President of the LNP Party of South Australia, and he is a walking miracle. He was diagnosed 12 months ago with stage 4 cancer, and through medical science and also through prayers, he is walking around healthy, fit and active. So he looks like he could beat me in an arm wrestle, actually, so I won't be taking him on. Actually, I might. But, he's looking fit, he's looking healthy. Damian Wyld, I want to thank you so much for joining us on 2020 today.
Great to be here.